anybody recently joining us, my name is Eric. I'm a naturalist here on staff, and today I want to tell you a story about the ocean and the people who study it. Now, growing up here in Monterey, I've always been drawn to the sea, from tide pooling along shore to scuba diving in the kelp forest outside. But no matter where you live or where you come from, all of our lives are shaped and influenced by the ocean. It's one of the most powerful forces on the entire planet. Now, some of you may know that fresh water will evaporate from the surface of the ocean and eventually return to us in the form of rain and snow. And this provides most of our planet's drinking water. But I think one of the biggest impacts from the sea comes from its smallest, most abundant forms of life: plankton. Now, these are phytoplankton, a tiny, plant-like organism that does just what plants do on land. They create oxygen, and lots of it. In fact, about half of the oxygen in the world is made within the ocean, and this process absorbs a lot of carbon dioxide, shielding us from the worst impacts of climate change. Now, along with that, phytoplankton form the base of most ocean food webs. They are eaten by slightly larger, more animal-like plankton, which we'll see in just a second, and all of those tiny plankton are then eaten by small schooling fish, like sardines. Now, everything eats small schooling fish: sharks, seabirds, dolphins, and even giant whales. And all of that life, whether it's on land or in the sea, is dependent on a healthy community of tiny phytoplankton. Now, we know quite a lot about all of those sunny and shallow waters, but most of the ocean is still quite the mystery, especially the deep sea. Crushing pressure, inky darkness, and freezing temperatures make this habitat very difficult to study. And we've been trying for quite a while. As far back as 1934, biologist William Beebe teamed up with engineer Otis Barton, and they made history off the coast of Bermuda. Now, after being bolted into a thick steel ball called the bathysphere, these men were lowered half a mile below the surface. That vessel creaked and groaned under the immense pressure around them, and they were soon surrounded by darkness. But any worries they may have had were soon gone when they peered out the window of their sub. Their eyes were open to strange, glowing creatures right out of science fiction. Now, while they didn't have any cameras on them and could only describe what they saw to friends on the surface, they might have seen animals like the black sea devil anglerfish, which uses a glowing lure to attract its prey. But no matter what they were witness to, Beebe and Barton's dives captured international attention, ushering in a new era of ocean exploration. They shed light on a vast, alien world previously impossible to visit, let alone think of. Now, that spirit of ocean exploration and research and education continues to this day. And by about 1984, tech pioneer David Packard opened the Monterey Bay Aquarium because he wanted the public to see the underwater world right outside. He also wanted to revolutionize how we studied it. So he founded the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, or MBARI for short, with a simple but powerful idea. Just like with Beebe and Barton, he put scientists and engineers on one team to build new tools for groundbreaking underwater research. And since then, MBARI has transformed our understanding of the ocean itself. Now, for anybody new to the area, I want to do a quick orientation so we can see where all of this is taking place. So, we're down here in Monterey. Across the bay is Santa Cruz, and right in the middle is a little town called Moss Landing, the home of MBARI. Now, that's because an enormous underwater canyon lies just offshore. Just like on land, the seafloor is full of mountains and valleys. And the Monterey Submarine Canyon here is about as wide and twice as deep as the Grand Canyon in Arizona, a maximum of 2.5 miles deep. Monterey is one of the few places in the world where the deep sea lies very close to the coast, and this allows MBARI to test out new tools, techniques, and ideas right in their own backyard. Now while they're out there, they might be using tools such as the Dock Ricketts, a remotely operated vehicle, or ROV. Now, an ROV is like a submarine, but with nobody on board, instead remotely controlled by pilots on the ship that sends it out. The crew stays safe and dry on the surface, while the robot collects samples, environmental data, and broadcasts its findings. Robots offer some key advantages over humans to exploring the ocean. For one thing, they don't get tired or hungry, so they can stay down much longer than we can. And while they're out there collecting all of those samples, they're also recording everything they encounter, capturing high-quality footage that can be shared around the world. Now, these machines aren't just discovering new life down there. They are studying how it behaves, adapts, reproduces, things pretty much impossible to do with vessels like the bathysphere. And what we have found is that Monterey itself is full of wonderfully weird deep-sea animals. Creatures like the barrel eye. Now this fish was first discovered in the 1930s when scientists pulled it up in nets that they dragged through the deep sea. But by 2008, MBARI discovered that this animal has a clear, gelatinous dome that covers its eyes and protects them from the stinging tentacles of the jellies it likes to eat. Now in the past, those nets dragged through the deep would actually destroy that dome. So, thanks to the ROVs studying it in its natural habitat, we now know that these little holes here are actually its nostrils, and these glowing orbs are its eyes. Wild stuff. Now one of my favorites to talk about here is called the vampire squid. This football-sized animal is named for its blood-red skin and its cloak-like arms. And in fact, when it feels threatened, the vampire squid can turn those arms inside out, looking less like some tasty calamari and more like a dangerous jelly. Now, despite its fearsome name and appearance, MBARI found that this animal likes to dine on these tiny white flecks here. We call this marine snow, and that's a fancy way of saying discarded skin, reproductive material, and poop. Think about that next time you take in a mouthful of seawater. But perhaps an even bigger fan of that marine snow would be the giant larvation. Well, it's giant compared to other larvaceans. At a whopping 4 inches long, it feeds on this marine snow by sending vast amounts of water through a filter house that it builds out of its own mucus. Now these booger houses, they can be up to 3 feet across, and to feed itself, this animal simply needs to beat its tail. This will draw in a current and send any food through those chambers directly to its mouth. Now if that house becomes too big or becomes clogged, all it has to do is swim away. And while its old home will sink to the bottom of the deep and perhaps become food for other animals down there, the giant larvation will build another straight from scratch. Now until very recently, it was pretty much impossible to study these things. They may be small, but they're also very delicate, so they can't be brought up to the surface. Instead, MBARI created a new, laser-based tool called the Deep PIV, allowing them to scan it in the field. Now from those scans, they built a 3D model of that complex filter house. And to our surprise, we found that the giant larvation can send 20 gallons of water every hour through those halls. Not bad for a 4-inch critter. Now finding food in the deep sea is not easy, but reproducing can be another challenge altogether. This black-eyed squid here is carrying around a massive egg case in her arms. And because there's nowhere to set those eggs down in the water column, she will not be able to eat or even defend herself for up to 9 months until they hatch. But I would give the Deep Sea Mom of the Century award to an octopus. Meet Granellodone boreopacifica. Mbari found her a mile below the surface, covering her recently laid eggs. Now just like that squid, octopus rarely, if ever, leave their young, not even to find food. So they checked back on her over days, months, and even years. And one day, 4.5 years later, they returned and found in her place 160 empty egg cases. And the best part? Some of her little babies were still hanging out nearby. Researchers were shocked, and to this day, that's the longest known period of any animal caring for their eggs, right here in Monterey. Now, Mbari isn't just studying life in the deep sea, they are also fascinated with its geography. Now, in the past, those underwater mountains, valleys, and canyons were mapped by boats on the surface, sometimes miles and miles away from the areas they were trying to study. So, Mbari designed a self-guided drone that can fly pre-programmed missions right alongside those features, capturing scans just as detailed as satellite images of land. Now, from those scans, they found that the ocean floor looks practically empty, almost like an underwater desert. So the next question was how life could even survive down there. To answer this, Mbari built the benthic rover, benthic meaning bottom. This car-sized robot is dropped off completely alone and will spend up to 6 months patrolling the seafloor, analyzing the life it encounters. They can later pull it back up to the surface, download its data, and prepare it for another mission. Now, those tools are great for studying smaller parts of the sea, but because the ocean is so massive, Mbari also wants to see the bigger picture. Now, ironically, they do it with a tiny robotic float that can spend up to 5 years in the open ocean. It's programmed to sink down into the deep with a variety of different sensors attached. It will collect a lot of its information on the way back up, but as soon as that little robot reaches the surface, it'll send that information to a satellite up in orbit. And that's freely available to researchers, policymakers, and educators around the world. Scientists can use this data to see how things like ocean acidification and other climate change effects are impacting our waters today, and perhaps predict future trends. In fact, the health of this habitat has become a major focus for Mbari's research as of late. And with all of these amazing tools, their findings are pointing towards one thing. The ocean is changing, and it's changing fast. Now that's because our ocean itself acts like a sponge, soaking up the excess carbon created when we burn fossil fuels for energy. That carbon is entering the sea at an alarming rate, and it's changing the chemistry of the water, making it warmer and more acidic. We are already seeing major effects of this on marine life, including those phytoplankton I mentioned earlier, those tiny animals essential for life on Earth. So, because they're at the heart of our climate system, one of Mbari's newest and perhaps most important missions is to see how those animals will fare in the years to come. But you don't have to be an Mbari scientist or engineer to help out the ocean. In fact, there are actions we can take in our everyday lives, no matter where you come from electing leaders and laws dedicated to taking climate action to reducing our own personal carbon footprint. Now, not everybody here can afford an electric car. I certainly cannot. But what about meatless Mondays, carpooling to work or school, or even just shopping for less plastic packaging? The possibilities are truly endless, especially when we work together. In fact, what we've taken a look at today is just a small glimpse into a century's worth of research and collaboration. So, as you think back on all of these amazing tools, discoveries, and animals, ask yourself, what would BB and Barton give to see what you have today? And how can we keep it safe for generations to come? Now folks, to explore more of the deep sea and Mbari's research, you can actually head on over to our newest exhibit, Into the Deep, with some animals never seen by the public until about a month ago.